So I want to dedicate this video specifically to the topic of UVs. And I'm going to give you guys my honest opinion about Houdini and UVs. In my opinion, Houdini has been taking the right steps towards having a better UV workflow. Having these radial menus, if I hold down C and I have all of these different UV projection things, is great. The work that Louise did with the game dev, which is now the Side Effects Labs tool set, is awesome. This auto UV, which is Labs auto UV right there, is awesome because we have different methods that we can use, and it does a lot of very intricate things when it comes to auto UVing and projecting onto the mesh. However, that all being the case, I still think that Houdini lags behind the other software applications when it comes to a fully comfortable, usable UV workflow. And there's two main reasons for that. One is usability. It's not very clean the way that the workflow is set up, in that usually when you're UVing, you want a destructive workflow. And then two, the other thing about it is that sometimes the performance will still lag behind the competitors when it comes to laying out the UVs and getting what you want quickly. And then also the stability isn't always there either. I've had plenty of times where I just crash whenever I'm trying to use the regular UV tool sets. And so as an overview, I would say that Houdini is decent at doing UVs, but it's not ideal. And if you're doing this professionally, if you're using Houdini professionally within a pipeline, I'd recommend that you get the Rhizome UV right there, or that you would instead pick a different application for your asset development, and you would just UV in a different app that's more catered towards this particular task. So that all being said, let's take a look at some of the basic notes. Houdini does do a few things really, really well when it comes to UVs, and there's almost no competition when it comes to procedural UVs. So let's start off with this scroll right here. I'll show you how the auto UV works in general with this. I'll also talk about why you should bother with anything besides auto UVs, or if you should at all. And we'll just kind of take it from there and see what that's all about. Okay, so with this skull here, it's a scan. And if we look at the topology, as you can see, there's no real topology to this. It's just a bunch of triangles. And the scan looks pretty awesome, but the question is, how would you UV something like this? Well, this is a situation where auto UV is going to be the best route to go, hands down. As a matter of fact, I would use auto UV for just about any object, except for if you have a character or if something needs some sort of directionality to the UV direction, the UV island direction. So in other words, if you have, let's say, tree bark, that needs a direction. And that would be a situation where you want to have clean UVs for the tree so that you could specify exactly where the bark goes. Likewise with, let's say, a character where you want to have a clean UV layout so that you can paint directly on the UV view. However, for everything else, it makes sense just to use auto UVs and then triplaners in the painting applications to actually apply whatever it is you're trying to do on the object. So my recommendation when using auto UV is this. Start off with the poly reduce. And I'm going to set this to, let's say, 10% of the number of polygons. The reason why I'm doing this is because with this lower topology right here, we can then test the settings of the auto UV, dial that in for this particular object, and then from there, we can dial in the settings we want and bring up the polygon counts once we've figured that out. Okay, so with the auto UV, let's go ahead and go here. Honestly, the defaults tend to give me the best results using this UV auto seam right here. And we have this grain in this merge threshold. The grain tolerance is basically how large the UV chunks are. So let's go ahead and split this top to bottom real quick, right there. We'll change this to UV, and what I'll do is just show you the defaults to start. So we'll let this cook here for a second. And there we go. As you can see, we have all of these kind of larger and tinier islands that show up, and they're all packed like so. If we turn up this grain tolerance, you'll see that these islands become larger. So let's say perhaps 0.4 as an example. But the problem with that is you reach a point where it's not giving you an accurate projection anymore. In other words, we have all of these islands and they're trying to merge, but they just keep overlapping each other in a way that's not usable. So for the grain tolerance, I would recommend keeping it at the lower default of 0.15, or if anything, bring that up just a slight bit. But it's something that you have to be careful about because it will cause the UV islands to overlap each other. The merge threshold is similar. If we turn this up to, let's say, 0.75, it's going to merge more of these tiny islands. But you run into the same exact problem as we mentioned before, where we have areas like this, the islands merged, but the islands are also overlapping each other. And that's not going to give you a great result. So to tell you the truth, I would recommend just keeping all of these at their defaults. And if you need to go higher in quality, or if you want the islands to break up more, then you can go down from the grain tolerance or the merge threshold. And so here you go. At the default values, we end up with something like this. Now we also have this visualize UVs SOP, and this is pretty useful because if we go here and let's just press W to toggle the wireframe, you could see exactly where these textures are being applied. Now, the orientation of these UVs don't make any sense. That's one thing that you probably never get with the auto UVs. But that's okay because we just need to make sure that there's no distortion. Again, the idea with auto UVs is that you'll do this and then you'll use a triplanar projection to apply the texture information to the UV maps. And so it's not quite the same thing as a triplanar that we just did through Redshift because it's going to write out to these UV maps. But as long as you have no distortion, you can get away with that technique and you won't see any odd artifacts. Okay, so for right now, I think that this is just fine. What I've already done ahead of time is I brought the polyreduce back to 100%. It took about, I'd say, 5 to 6 minutes for this auto UV to work. And then I cached out the results so that we have a new skull with all of these UVs. Now, be careful about something though, because as you can see, we've stretched this out by a lot. And that's because of this visualize UVs. And so before you cache this out, be sure to disable the visualize UVs because it's going to scale this up. And then once you do that, we'll move on to something else. Now it just so happens that we do have an object here which can use some manual UVs. If we zoom in here to the roof, look at this. We can't get away with traditional triplanar projections when it comes to the roof tiles. We have this cylindrical object right here, and we need a specific direction to how these roof tiles are organized. And so you're not going to get away with triplanars on this particular roof. It needs clean UVs. So in the next video, let's talk about a technique which can get you great looking UVs for just about any object.